groove to wake up to. What a great show to I'm toot my own horn, toot toot. You're listening to Waking Up. I'm Juliana Forlano.
King Downing. What was that song? That was great.
Alana?
Max and Mark.
Max and Mark? What was that song?
Go for it, Max. What was it?
That is, I guess we can call it the theme song.
Yeah.
For our new podcast.
Oh, and which is why you are here.
Which is why we are here.
So if you are just joining us, we have two other guests in the studio. It's nice and tight in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 people in the round table. It's fantastic. So in the you're the hosts and producers of this brand new School Colors podcast, whose trailer drops today, which is exactly just a few days after school starts this semester. And
school started yesterday.
And
right.
people are, well, unless you go to private school, someone
Right.
reminded me.
Charter schools started earlier.
Yeah, chartered
too.
schools, yeah. They want the money. It's important. It's important, and it's a great timing to drop the podcast. Can you talk about...
That was our thinking.
It's called School Colors. Can you talk about, talk about your piece? The schools in Bed-Stuy used to be so overcrowded that students went to school in shifts. Now they're half empty. What happened?
That's it. You want to go, Max?
So that's the question that we started with. And whenever I talk about this to anybody, they say, okay, so what happened? And as if there's one really simple answer, and there just isn't. It is a combination of, first of all, the neighborhood dramatically, the population went down dramatically, starting in the 70s, and the population of the schools went down at the same time. What's different in the last 15 years is the population of the neighborhood has been going up, and the population of the schools has continued to go down, and in fact has accelerated going down.
That's Max Friedman, journalist, teacher, and theater artist based in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. In addition to School Colors, you produce Unsettled. We know that one because we have Alana, who also produces Unsettled. I see how this got together. I love Theater of the Oppressed, and you are facilitator there and on the faculty at Pratt.
Mm-hmm. That's me.
Excellent. So, and also sitting next to Max is Mark Winston Griffin, third-generation resident of Crown Heights and executive director of the Brooklyn Movement Center, a community organizing group based in central Brooklyn. Over the last 20 years. You don't look 20 years.
It's been more than that, but
4 years old when you
started. But thank you.
Mark's led a combination of public policy, think tanks, community organizing campaigns, and economic justice projects. But my guess is it's not just the population shift that has kept the schools both overcrowded and then emptied.
Well, that's what we're investigating. That's what we're interrogating during this series. There are 8 episodes. And every episode has a slightly different theme.
So the people who are coming to live there are not sending their kids to the public schools?
Yeah, or they don't have kids like me.
Right.
You did it.
Right. Well, that's one reason. Charter schools are there as well. I mean, the under-enrollment has been happening for quite a long time now. And so, again, we look at a lot of different reasons why the under-enrollment has been happening.
And a lot of people would say this is school choice in the success of school choice. If the schools are not doing well, people are not choosing them, and so that's the market doing its thing.
And what's ironic about it is that gentrification actually, if in a very cynical way, could be a solution. That is, you have more families coming in who might be possibly sending their children into the schools there.
Yeah, because not everyone can fit in 321. Because there's also a migration to everyone trying to go to the one school.
To District 15.
And so we're starting slowly to see that happen in District 16, which is our focus.
Jeez, you're so close to 15.
Yeah. There's a couple of schools that are the candidates for the 321, which if you're in Brooklyn, you sort of know what 321 signifies. But
gentrification.
But there's a little bit of that going on in District 16, whereas there are 1 or 2 or 3 schools that are labeled good schools, and everyone is throwing elbows to get in there. Then there are other schools that are just almost abandoned.
I don't like this idea that the free market got to decide who made our schools good. This is like a public good, us pooling our resources to have good public education. Schools should be good across the board, in theory. Is that accurate? What happens in certain areas where the educational level is not upheld?
Well, the focus of one through line for the podcast all the way through is parent power. And this is an area where there's a really long history and tradition of parent power, but also an area where parent power, the tools of parent power were really stripped away. And so you've seen in the last part of the story that we're telling is in the last 5 or 6 years that there's a couple of parents in this district who have made a really big effort to put it back on the map, to keep knocking on the doors of the Department of Education to make sure that they get what they need in this district. And without those kinds of people, I mean, it's a full-time unpaid job. Without people like that doing that work, nothing happens. And even with them doing that work, the tools that they have are informal. They have the bully pulpit. They have the right person's phone number to call, but there's very little they have actual power to do. So they can't remove a principal, for example. They can't, things like that.
Your podcast is a documentary podcast called School Colors from Brooklyn Deep, is what you said.
Brooklyn Deep. You have that glaze in your eye. I don't know what that means. Brooklyn Deep is an affiliate of Brooklyn Movement Center. So Brooklyn Movement Center is a community organizing group, and Brooklyn Deep is a citizen journalism arm of it. So this is a production of that.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
How
I
have
think
I not
so.
heard of this before?
Yeah, we in fact we do a podcast, a monthly podcast called Third Rail as well. But this is by far our most ambitious production.
Why aren't you here on WBAI as a general? Linda, we got two new hosts for you. Pretty soon.
We have a good track record of bringing people in.
Yeah,
just through our show.
Yeah.
And some of our people, like Verilyn Williams, for instance, was a staff person with us, and she used to have a show on WBAI. So there are connections. We're in the family.
Awesome. What do you think it was the most surprising thing that you learned as you were doing this research around education?
We're looking at each other here.
Yeah.
I mean, you go, Max.
Well, first of all, how far back this goes. We start in episode 1 all the way back in the 1830s with Weeksville, which was an independent free black community in central Brooklyn, just south of Bed-Stuy, and there was an independent black school there. And in that independent black school, there also were white students, and they were figuring out how to deal with that in 1853.
Yeah.
And they were figuring out how to deal with it when the black principal hired a white assistant principal in
Gee, these
1869.
kids want to play with each other and they don't notice differences. We need to stop
Well,
that.
I mean, the point is that over the last centuries, the problem, or I shouldn't say the problem, but the situation and the racial dynamics in some ways haven't shifted all that much. And that's what was really striking. That's one thing that we learned, whether it was in 1850 or in 1950 or 1980, many of the dynamics we're still struggling with in terms of race and class.
I think and then in episodes 2 and 3, we go deep on the story of Ocean Hill-Brownsville and the movement for community control of schools there. And I think one thing that was surprising to me is that people don't really want to talk about it, which is a rabbit hole that we could get into. But
Well, can we get into the rabbit hole a little bit? Because
Sure.
there are a lot of people who don't know the word Ocean Hill-Brownsville. But could
Right.
you talk about that historic fight?
Mark, you want to do the overview?
Sure. So in the late 1960s, there was a struggle around community control of schools that has been called Ocean Hill-Brownsville because it in many ways, it centered in Ocean Hill-Brownsville, but in fact, it was a citywide struggle where there was an experiment within a community and within some other schools for parents and teachers and people in that neighborhood to actually govern their school and their school system. And that came in conflict with union power and and union rights. And so over a period of more than a year, there were a series of strikes and divisions that occurred along racial lines that pitted blacks against whites, blacks against Jews, unions against activists. I mean, it's split so many different ways. It really sort of makes your head spin. And so that is known as Ocean Hill-Brownsville, and it really has shaped the school system that we have today. In fact, everything you look at today in terms of the modern school system has been a reaction to that moment.
And I will also say, I mean, some of the ways in which Ocean Hill-Brownsville scrambles your natural, maybe ideological, political affiliations, like where do I go? Do I go with the unions or do I go with the racial justice movement? Like that feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach where it's like, I feel like I want to be on everybody's side here. That feeling continues into the stories that we're telling today, where you have a lot of people feel like this is a cliche in Bed-Stuy, but trying to do the right thing and coming into conflict. And How do we make our way through that? I mean, it's not to say that there's obviously power differentials and there are bad faith actors, but yeah.
Right, and in the midst of doing this, we fell in the middle of the 50th anniversary of the Ocean Hill-Brownsville struggle. So that was a centerpiece of our production.
So, School Colors is the name of the podcast. Where can people find it?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera.
You did it. Did you test it last night to make sure it's working?
I was testing it this morning on the bus on my way here.
Let's open
and
up-
at schoolcolorspodcast.com.
Excellent. School Colors. Let's open up the phone lines, 212-209-2877. That's our listener call-in line here on WBAI, and see if you would like to ask some questions of our podcast makers. Maybe not like how do you make a good podcast, but maybe something more closely related to education. This sounds like it's the kind of topic that is happening in cities across our nation. So although it is hyper-local, it is of national interest as well.
You must have read our press release.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't actually. Alana was like, "Can they come on? I know them." I'm like, "Sounds good."
No, that's exactly right. And it does sound hyper-local, but I think anyone in any city across the country can listen to this and identify with what is happening here.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first day of school. What advice would you give people who are their children are going to schools that are in this situation?
What advice would we give to people?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot happening policy-wise, particularly here if you live in Brooklyn, and we're using words again like integration and desegregation that we, in some ways,
Still?
haven't used. I know for a long. I know, right? Still,
Come on.
right. So, I mean, I would say listen to this podcast to get some perspective on the dynamics that are shaping your child's education.
We have callers on the line. Let's go to that. Caller, your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, good morning. I'm Chris. I'm from Stamford, Connecticut.
Hi, Chris. Your question or comment?
My question is just, and this affects gentrification and everything as well that you've been talking about, but what is behind the right-wing shift in political ideology and beliefs worldwide? It's scary. I'm not just disappointed in Trump or my fellow American voters. I'm disappointed in everybody around the world. With Bolsonaro, we have the right-wing Italian leader, I guess, the president. He's kind of conservative.
He's out.
Boris Johnson, of course, Trump. What is going on?
I'll tell you what's going on. Anyway, thanks for the question, Chris. I appreciate it. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, are we supposed to answer that?
No, that's a wide-ranging question.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a
it was
wide-
more about education, right? Because
Yeah.
just taking all the money out of education, privatizing it, it's like cannibalizing our children for money. That would be my answer. But
Yeah, and I guess
guys
my
are the
answer would be
experts.
is that the chickens are coming home to roost, right? I mean, the right wing has been cultivating this narrative around, people to blame for your lot in life, whether it's immigrants, it's people of color, it's Muslims, people who-
union.
right? And so this has been, nurtured over decades, and now I think that it's in full maturity, and it's turning on us. We're cannibalizing ourselves.
we have other callers on the line. We'll get to them. What do you make of? Did you cover any of is the teachers union active in that district or?
Yeah, well,
That's a good question.
go for it.
Well, we have not been able to get them to talk to us.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they should. I know some of them are listening, so maybe watch listen to the podcast. It's called School Colors. Anywhere podcasts are available, and then you'll call because you'll want your voices heard. We have callers on the line. Caller, your name and where you're calling from. Hello.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi, you're on
Hi.
the air.
Yeah, I remember that time as a young person and living in the Bronx, and my nephews caring for them, that we set up freedom schools. And we had teachers and parents involved, and we met in people's homes. And I think we occupied a room in the school. And it was a very contentious time with the union, but there were progressive people from the union who decided that at this time it was important to cross a line that we had never crossed before because it was about community. Though I understand people were arbitrarily gotten rid of, there wasn't due process, it went on very quickly, but the overall issue of community control started to come in, and then we had community school boards and all, and then maybe it went to the other extreme, and now they've gotten rid of it.
Rebecca,
That's
great comment. Thanks for calling in with that. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Your
I mean,
thoughts?
I would just say this, through the course of doing this podcast, we realized something about ourselves, which is, Rebecca was pointing to the divisions within the union. Well, in fact, my uncle was a teacher during that time and was in the union. And
my mom's first cousin was a teacher at the time and was in the union.
Right. And then we learned through the course of doing this production that they knew each other and that they were on opposite sides
Wow.
of the picket line. Right.
Oh, what episode is that? Can we-
Three.
just episode 3.
And they what the caller was saying about freedom schools, both of them did that. Mark's uncle fought to keep his school building open, and my cousin, who was on the side of the union, started a freedom school in a housing development that with other people who were on the side of the union.
I can see what you mean about how you want to be on both sides, and that it's kind of gut-wrenching because
Yeah.
we each are on the side of one slice of justice. It's nice when they can get together and see the common ground and work for that. Did that happen?
Not so much. I mean, I well, no. I mean, I think you should listen.
They became friends after all this was over. So
Yes.
in that-
Okay.
on that-
Those two in
And
particular.
you guys are doing this podcast
Right.
together, so it worked
Yeah, yeah.
out.
No. If you're talking about those two in particular, yes, they became friends, and I think that there was some healing that occurred after that.
And the union, to its credit, did a lot of work to try to get teachers of color into the union in numbers that they hadn't been before the strike.
Oh my gosh, we're at the end of our show. Thank you so much for coming on. The podcast is called School Colors. It drops today. Go check it out wherever, iTunes, SoundCloud, all the places where there are podcasts.
SoundCloud, I need to do SoundCloud.
Oh, get up there.
Do it.
We've been speaking with Mark Winston Griffin and Max Friedman. Hey, one of you had to go drop kids off and then race over here.
Yes, that was me.
But neither of you look sweaty. Hey, thanks for joining us on the program. You're listening to Waking Up with Juliana and King. We will be back on Monday morning. I hope you have a lovely weekend.